nothing has us feel safe from an instinctual vibration, able to think thoughts and not others, the whole capacities that come from feeling truly safe. Nothing contributes to that the same way as one man that you know is for you.
Hello, and welcome to the Renaissance of Men podcast. My name is Will Spencer. My guest this week is a speaker, thought leader, and best-selling author of The Keys to the Kingdom and the Queen's Code, Alison Armstrong. In 2018, as I was discovering that the men's movement was much bigger than I realized, reading Donovan and Tomasi and listening to Mickler and Peterson, I also discovered Alison's books, and I saw myself reflected in them to a degree that I still find striking. It's quite a thing to realize that a woman has just as many good things to say about men as men do, and perhaps even more. But that's the Alison Armstrong, and she's quite a thing too. And now, almost 9 years after publishing The Queen's Code in print, she's finally released it in audiobook version, and not a moment too soon. Because whether or not people know to call it that, the Great Reconciliation is happening. And The Queen's Code audiobook is here to help us hear, and most importantly feel, the ways we could be as men and women together. In our conversation, Alison and I discussed her journey to write and record The Queen's Code, the difference between needing versus being needy, how Alison used to treat men at parties long before she wrote The Queen's Code, the importance of discovering our ultimatums, or the things in relationship we're not willing to live without, why we should all go a bit easier on the nice guys, and finally, stories about her relationship with the man in her life, Dan, who even shows up at the very end to say hi. If you enjoy the Renaissance of Men podcast, thank you. Don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe, and share this episode so we can reach more men and women. So please join me in welcoming this week's guest on the Renaissance of Men podcast, the best-selling author and voiceover artist of The Queen's Code, my friend, Alison Armstrong. Hey, Alison, welcome back to the podcast.
Thank you. I'm so glad to be here.
Well, I want to say congratulations. You are now far and away my number one podcast of all time. First podcast to cross 5,000 downloads, which is pretty incredible when you think about it. It was like four hours long. So,
oh my gosh.
It's really cool to see, like they'll just spike out of nowhere, like hundreds of downloads in a month. Like someone must share it somewhere. It's really cool to see that, just how long the legs have been for that conversation.
Wow. Well, I mention you a lot as well, so I don't know if people go looking at that point, but we have extraordinary conversations ever since the first run for the Renaissance of Men.
That's right. It seems to be a habit. Well, congratulations also on the release of the Queen's Code audiobook, which I finished listening to. And, as I mentioned, I've read the print, the Kindle version, or read the book a couple times, but hearing it read in your voice lended a whole new shade of meaning to some of the interactions between the characters, your characterizations of them, and the meaning behind the words. To really, it brought it to life in a very different way from your imagination rather than just me imposing my imagination on it. And both are equally valid. So what was that process like for you recording the audiobook?
It was intense. It was emotional, as you can hear my voice sometimes. It was, there are a couple of things that were odd. Like, how did that happen? Mm-hmm. But it goes back to, as you know, I started studying men in 1991, mm-hmm. Right? The scene in the first chapter of the Queen's Code actually happened to me. Not Keys of the Kingdom, the prequel. But the scene in the first chapter, the Queen's Code, it happened to me. My colleague, coworker, kind of friend was called a frog farmer. Mm-hmm. and I had the vision that Kimberly is expressing. And then as I realized, oh my gosh, I'm really a frog farmer. I'm a very successful frog farmer. Yes. I prided myself in the way I thought of it as getting men to show their true colors. Yeah. Within like 10 days. Yeah.
Industrial frog farmer.
Oh my gosh. I did not want to fall in love again. And so I had come to the conclusion that men are cons, and I wanted to reveal a con before I fell for it. And it didn't occur to me that I had anything to do with the version of every man I was getting. I thought that was the real version, which I now equate to taking a dog and then blaming the dog when it bites you, or runs away and then bites you, or bites you and then runs away. All those versions can happen. And but this question popped into my head as I was sitting there confronting it. And the question was, what if men are responding to women? And I've talked about that question, right? And it's worth listening to those conversations in your podcast, the one we did before. But that's really the beginning of a lot of strangeness that I'm only now coming to terms with.
Strangeness.
Like, that question popped into my head. Where did that question come from?
And that's always the question, right?
Yes. Yeah. And that's what I've been delving into. And including other questions that have guided my research that I thought of that question.
Maybe the question thought of you.
Could be, yes. But in the story of the Queen's Code, other strangeness I never questioned. Like, these questions popping in my head. What if men are responding to women? And then when Greg did something that was just outrageous to me, the question, what if there's a good reason for that? Which led to all my research on that everybody, man or woman, only ever does what's important to them.
Yeah.
Ever. And so all the things we think we should do that we haven't done, they just haven't risen to the level of importance, right? And that happened because Greg, knocked over a blender of mine, left it broken on the floor.
Single focus to extreme.
He was trying to catch an airplane. And
okay, I get it.
Yeah. And then what if no one's misbehaving, including you? Right? It was another one that popped in. And then a few years ago, just right out of my mouth, honor yourself first or all is lost. And so these kinds of things that popped in, right? And so that's where my research began, right? What if men are responding to women? And within, that was 1991, within a year of that, I had been asked to stop castrating men, literally put that way, and had done so. Seeing what happens when we don't interact with men by hand me your power and then we'll talk. I had met Greg, right, my not yet husband, but soon to be. And I'd come to the conclusion that the things that I'd learned in that year had to be shared, that I had to write a book. I have to put this in a book. But I talked to somebody about it, and he told me how to tell whether I had enough material for a book. And if you have more than 10 chapter titles, you can do a book. And I did, definitely, a year in. And it was shortly after that I was meeting Greg's family and talking to his sister-in-law, and I could tell that her marriage was in trouble. I'd been watching the way they were interacting. I was watching the way she talked about him. I could tell, like we discussed in Keys to the Kingdom, I could tell he had become a king, and she hadn't caught up with that. His needs were very different than the 20 years that they had been together and raised a family together. And she wasn't adapting. And this was having a huge effect, and it could get worse. And I tried to tell her about it. I tried to tell her about the stages of development, and she basically wasn't listening. She just didn't care. And then I switched over to telling her a story. And it's just this funny little story a friend of mine and I made up called The Princess and the Swamp Rat.
All right. Let's see where this goes.
We can go back to it. If you wanted to hear the story of the princess and the swamp rat, I'll tell you the story. But all of a sudden,
I kind of do.
All of a sudden, I had a complete attention. And we were shopping together, and, girls can talk and shop. But now she's paying attention. And then her husband comes to pick us up, give us a ride back to the family reunion. And she's like, shh, Dad, shh, Alison's telling me the story. Let her finish. And that's when I got it. Oh, whatever this book is, it needs to be a story. And
okay.
That's where it came from. This has got to be a story, because we can hear things when we're not in the hot seat, right? When someone's saying, you are doing this and don't do this, this, or this, it's very hard to learn. It's very hard to let our guards down. It's very hard to let our point of view be altered. So actually the next day we were driving home and I was writing, like the story started showing up, and I was writing it literally on a shopping bag, a brown paper shopping bag.
Oh, wow.
And it was just coming out, and I was writing. And as I did that, which ended up just being the first couple chapters, not even chapter, like paragraphs, and I don't even know where they ended up because of what happened when I came to write the book. But it became obvious as I was doing that I didn't know how to write the book. That I had already used what I learned about men against men badly, hurt men badly once I found out how you're really motivated. Kryptonite. And that I needed to write a book that at that time I thought it was just for women. I didn't know, Will, how much it would affect men. And I needed to write a book.
Can confirm.
Oh my gosh. Whole other thing we can talk about, but I'm sure we will since you listened to it, but read it and then listened to it. And so as I realized that I needed to know more. I needed to know more about, one, what triggered women to emasculate men, and two, how they did it, all the different ways that they did it, and three, and maybe most importantly, how they justified it.
Yep.
I needed to know a whole lot more about that. And then fourth, what do you do instead? Right? Since the emasculation comes from fear and frustration, what do you do instead? How do women emasculate men because they think that's the only way to get what they need? And even though it doesn't work, they don't have an alternative. So I had to figure out all four of those things. And that's when I told my best friend, I think I need to do a workshop in order to learn how to teach this so that I can write the book. And so we did that starting in January of 1995. I didn't know it would take almost 15 years of doing those workshops before one evening I knew how to write the book. I'd gotten enough of all those four things in all these different expressions from thousands of women and contributions of hundreds of men. I finally knew how to write it. And so I wrote a book proposal, right? Chapter by chapter, and this will be about this, and that'll be about that. And then me and my agent went to New York, and we had a bidding, for the publication of the book. And that's very, very exciting. We'll talk about what it does for your ego. We have bidding on your book. And I chose the editor that I loved the most and felt the most resonance with, and then sat down to write the book. And then that's when it got really strange, which had happened before with Keys of the Kingdom, but I didn't trust it to happen again. And that was, I sat down to write, and it literally occurs like it's like this big. It's like this big, and it's right here. And a movie screen opened, and a movie started playing, and I started typing. And I didn't know the word channeling then, and I still don't trust that word. It seems weird to me, and what the heck is that? I just know that that no one can write a 96,000 word book in 3 weeks.
That's pretty fast.
Yeah, and I didn't write it. I just watched the movie and typed as fast as I could, and it was weird. It was like trying to write a screenplay from a movie, right? So that
backwards,
yeah. Trying to describe what I was seeing.
Mm-hmm.
Like how do you describe this? How do you describe that? And then it was also really, Keys to the Kingdom, which was what I knew I could write at the time, years before, like 15 years before, I don't know, many years before, 2003. That ran as a movie too. And that's like 42,000 words. And it all got typed up in like 8 days. But I kind of forgot how weird it was. I kind of just never.
What?
What? I know. This is. Well, I'm coming more to terms with the strangeness of my life, and which, as you know, became stranger when my husband died, and so it's actually been stunning. And you asked what it was like to do the audiobook. So I'd done 3 book clubs, I think, before that, 2 or 3 book clubs with the Shift Network, which meant I reread the book to prepare for every session, every chapter with the participants. And even reading the book there kept being things that surprised me. I didn't know that was taught in this book. I didn't know we did that in this book. I don't remember that happening. And then when I was recording the audiobook, 2 things. One was, it was so much more intense.
I bet.
I just conveying the story, reading the story, consistent with how I watched it, right? I realized, oh my gosh, the emotion, the pain, the joy, the struggle, like everything was so much more intense in me reading the story to everybody. And I was like matching the movie that I watched, right? And the movie was vivid for me as I was reading it, even though every part I was reading, I didn't remember was in there. Right? And when I was typing up the movie, like people have asked me, so how did you pick these 8 characters? I didn't.
No.
Why did you have the story evolve like this? I didn't.
Couldn't tell you.
I didn't. I transcribed the movie. I did all the research. I mean, I did everything in the Queen's Code is validated by real life research that I did. There isn't anything in there that is outrageous, outlandish, unthinkable. No, it's all based on real research. And the characters in the story are just themselves. And which was then what happened that was really, now this is odd upon odd, as I was doing the audio recording, and sometimes I just have to stop because I was overwhelmed with emotion. And there was one particular time that I lost it. Do you know? Oh my gosh. Just so you're not distracted by wondering, it's the part when Bert confronts Claudia about how exhausted teaching is for her and what he's seen happening to her. And as he's making, he wants to make a deal. as he's making a deal with her, and telling her what he needs and what it would provide. At the end of that, you might remember he says, "I'm not done needing you."
Mm-hmm.
Remember that?
Yeah.
I don't know how long it took and how many times I had to retake that to get through it, because I didn't know that was in the Queen's Code. And that was what I was literally screaming at Greg while I was trying to bring him back from the heart attack. I was doing my version of CPR as watched on TV. It didn't matter if I could have done it right. It was a triple explosion in his chest. But that's what I was yelling at him. "I'm not done needing you." I just reading that in a book. Oh my gosh. And so that wasn't even the other strange part I wanted to tell you. The other strange part was, and I don't know how this happens, how does a movie change? So as I was recording the audiobook, you know this about me, right? I have this thing about truth, right? And truth has a feel, right? And authenticity has a feel to it. And what I call old brain. When someone's not present, and they're just speaking rotely about something they're used to speaking about, or words that don't really mean anything to them anymore, they don't stand out. It has this quality I call old brain. It's kind of right, okay. And I can hear it, and people aren't learning, right? When they're an old brain, they're not learning. When it's all about new neural pathways, right?
I see.
Yeah. So I just have this feel for stuff, and it took a long time for me to figure out that it only happened when Claudia was speaking. And I had to retake Claudia's parts. It ended up taking usually 4 times. I would have to redo it before it had the resonance of what she meant.
Yep, that makes sense.
Yeah.
You live in that material.
Well, what was strange was that I would do it the way that I heard it. The way that I heard it when I first transcribed the book. I would say it that way, and it wouldn't be right. And I'd say it again, and it's not right. I'd say it again. And always when it was finally right, Claudia had changed. In the 10 years since I watched the movie, Claudia changed. She was both more intense, more playful, and more compassionate than the person I watched in the movie initially. How does that happen? But I kept doing it until it felt right. And it was delightful to me to see what had happened to her. Some people might say that's also happened to me.
That was going to be my question.
Well, that's the other thing that's odd about the Queen's Code is, when I started studying men, I was Melissa. I was that awful.
It's incomprehensible. Right?
I was that hurt. I was that bitter. I was that vengeful and antagonistic. I was Melissa. And then I became Kimberly when I found out I was a frog farmer and got curious, right? And Karen, I never really was Karen. I just taught a lot of Karens, right? But then here I was reading this last year, and I had become more Claudia. And after 30 years of teaching this material and the vastness, right? Because I've never stopped researching. So I just kept thinking as I was recording it that I wanted, I just kept hearing, I want to be there for people. I want to be there for people. And because how intense it is and how quickly you get to chapter 3. I had months before I got to chapter 3 in my life when I was studying.
Yes.
Yeah. Folks are having like 4 hours of listening to the book before they get to chapter 3 and are asked to completely alter the way that they're interacting with themselves and others. And I just kept thinking, I got to be there for them. I want to be there for them. And I just started last week, the second time. I call it your Queen's Code journey, because everyone has a different journey. I'm looking forward to hearing about yours. And everyone's is different. And I just wanted to be there to answer their questions, right? Just like Karen and Kimberly got to ask all their questions before they took the big leap of laying down the sword. I wanted my people to get to do that. And I did it over the summer, and I just started doing it for the second time because it's such an amazing thing to do. And I'm still learning from the Queen's Code. That's what, that's another strange thing. Yeah.
Me too.
Me too. Your third time.
My third time.
So tell me about it.
My Queen's Code journey?
Follow-up question. Yeah.
Yeah. And before we do that, do you have a fan in there, something like that?
Oh, let me fix that. That. Sorry.
Okay, good. No problem.
Sorry about that.
That's okay. It's believe me, I've had way worse situations to work with in podcasts before. So this was an easy fix. Okay. So, you asked about my Queen's Code journey, and there's a couple things I want to point out before I answer that question. First is that you started writing and thinking about writing about men in the 90s. Now, most people who are in what we call the men's movement now didn't start doing that until like 2005, 2010. I mean, you had guys like Robert Bly and Warren Farrell and Douglas Wilson and Robert Moore, Douglas Gillette, doing it in the early 90s. But you started as far back as then. And I don't know that that's appreciated enough, that you've been doing this longer than most men have been doing it, which I think is pretty remarkable. So that you've had 30 or so years to develop, which I think is what gives your work the power that it does. And it's so strange that you've been doing it for so long, but you go talk to men about like, no, I've never heard of Alison Armstrong, but then there's all these other people over here who have. So, that's always very cool. And then I think the other thing is that, the Queen's Code audiobook is almost 11 hours long, just over 10 hours long.
Yeah.
Right. And so you're talking about multiple takes. I mean, I can imagine it must have taken you 40 hours or so probably to try and record it. I mean, at least, if you're trying Claudia over and over again, and Claudia talks a lot in the book, as it turns out.
I don't know. I'd have to look at the bill from the sound engineer.
Oh, wow.
I just know that there were whole parts that I didn't have to do multiple takes.
Got it.
It was usually just Claudia.
Okay.
And yeah, it probably, I'm trying to think, how many weekends did we spend doing that? It was probably about 20 hours of me recording, but then I had multiple people listen and went back and did retakes and things to, and just things that, like squeaky chairs. There's no such thing as a not squeaky chair.
No such thing.
Even in a professional sound studio. And yeah, so there were a lot of people who participated in the quality of it and, had them, the last one had literally Bose headphones on, and I was having her listen for anything that would distract people from the experience they were in. I just didn't want that to happen to them.
Right.
It's like someone munching next to you with some popcorn in a movie. I didn't want that to happen.
Right. For some reason, I guess I had pictured you recording it at home, but if you actually went into an audio, like a professional studio, that makes sense. That makes sense too. That must have been a very different experience, actually, because I could picture you at home in your home studio or something like that, recording it privately, but to be in a professional studio recording that stuff in front of other people must have been an experience. I have to ask about that because I just pictured you doing it alone and being able to have your own kind of experience, re-encountering and trying to embody some of the things the characters are saying and the story itself. But it was actually a shared experience in a way. Like that must have been a whole other thing.
Well, it had its moments. His name is Steve Boynton, and Dan found him for me.
He did a great job. The audio sounds incredible.
Yeah, thank you. He was amazing. I'd never met him before scheduling to do this. It's actually what had me end up moving. One of the things that the impetus for moving to Steamboat was I already needed to be here for periods of time to do the recording. And so I moved here in the middle of it based on other things. And so he was someone who didn't know me. He didn't know my work or anything about it. He didn't even really follow along in this story in the beginning. He was just being technical, right? Mm-hmm. And it wasn't until later on, one of the times that the emotion came through. I think it was Kimberly's emotion that came through, and I said, I think I need to do that again, and he actually said it sounded right. Like by then something had happened. It was very much further along in the book, and he's like, I don't think you need to. It fits, and so the way he listened had changed.
That's great.
But he was present for, there literally were times I just broke down and sobbed. And he just waited till I recovered myself. Part of what would have me end up be emotional, Will, is that however they do it, the characters, those people exist. And when I was transcribing Keys to the Kingdom, like one morning I woke up and I think you read Keys to the Kingdom, right? Or did you listen to it?
I read that first.
Okay, good. Yeah, I like it for people to read it first, but they don't have to. And so that was also a movie, right? And I didn't decide on those 4 characters. And then for them, those 4 to go on and become 8. But when I was writing Keys to the Kingdom, like I woke up one morning and I knew that today was the day that Karen was going to see the table, right? This table keeps getting referred to, right? Yeah. And I just knew there was something special about this table, but I didn't know what it was because I'm just transcribing the movie. And I woke up that morning and I thought, oh, Karen's going to see the table today. And I said out loud, do you think you should show it to me? And then, boom, I saw the table, right? And just, oh my gosh, right? I didn't see Kimberly's chair till Kimberly saw her chair. And and Karen and Bert were standing in front of the chair and she was asking him about it, right? And why he did it. I didn't know any of that until he was talking. But what happens is that I can check in with them. Yeah. So I'm about in the first trimester pregnant with the sequel movie. And it's tempting for me to see if I can only do it in an audiobook instead of a print book, because now I know how different my conveyance of this story is from someone reading it to themselves. And this beautiful woman in South Africa, her name is Candace, what she expressed to me in talking about having read the Queen's Code, which she did a few years ago, and then listening to it, she said, and it was so shocking to me, I can't quote her accurately, I need to go back and listen to it, but it was to the effect of, she said, Alison, I realized that I didn't read the men's parts to myself the way that you do.
Mm-hmm.
Because of my prejudice against men, that they would never be that, I think she said, that sincere or that emotional.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when I realized, oh my gosh, everyone who's read the Queen's Code since it was published in 2012, right? Everyone, which is, somewhere over 100,000 people have read it to themselves. We don't know the exact number because
right.
When we originally printed it, we made it possible for people to download it and print out as many copies as they wanted.
Oops. I mean, cool, but oops.
It wasn't an oops. I did it on purpose.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Yeah. I've expressed it as, my goal is to be the most pirated author.
Careful what you wish for.
Well, I am. And people actually, I'll say, how did you find out about me? And they'll be like, I'm sorry. My friend made a copy of the NSYNC CD and gave it to me.
Okay.
And I just
That's cool.
laugh. And when we originally published Keys to the Kingdom, people got a PDF.
Mm-hmm.
and it came with a letter that said, well, we hope you'll let your friends and family buy their own copy of Keys to the Kingdom. If you just can't help it, I forgive you in advance. I just would say, this is unprotected, and I forgive you in advance. And I don't know how many people did that, but I'm a messenger, right? So get the message out. And people passing secret notes is sometimes one of the best ways to do it. And anyhow, my point was, where I started out with, is I can check in. I can check in with the story. And it's like they give me movie trailers of what's to come.
Oh.
And
Here we go.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And so I knew, before recording the audiobook last year, I knew that the next book starts a year after the Queen's Code ends. It's been a year. And I know it starts with the characters reflecting back on all that happened for them in that year, and how excited they are now that the lessons are beginning again. Yeah, so there's things that I know are going to happen that colored me recording the audio.
Oh, sort of like you were foreshadowing, almost, in a way.
Well,
okay.
I just knew, but when I originally transcribed it, I didn't know that was going to happen.
Sure.
But now we're doing the audiobook. Now I know things that are going to happen that I didn't know, and it changed the meaning of. Yeah.
Well, I think you asked me about my Queen's Code journey, and I'm actually really enjoying hearing about your Queen's Code journey, right? Because most people don't really have, well, I can't say that, but it's a book, your books profoundly impacted me. And I want to talk about that in a second, but it's really amazing to hear the way that your own books have impacted you. And I think that's the thing that really came through in listening to the audiobook, was that I know you and we've spent a lot of time talking, and I could listen into the audiobook and I could hear inflections in your voice and the way that you would say things. I was like, okay, I bet that was a pretty meaningful kind of moment, or hear you smiling in some ways. And it was like, okay. And so I got a hint of it, but to hear the way that it's evolved for you over 30 or so years since your initial being called a frog farmer, and you had told me that that was a real story, and the story about the snap shirts, right? I remember you telling me, right?
I forgot. I told
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So can you tell that story real quick? Because I think it's like a point A to point B, C, D kind of thing, where it's like to know you now and to read the ways that you write and think and teach about men, and to read the way that to hear you tell the story of the way that you were.
Yeah.
It's one of those things like, how does a person get from there from point A to point B? So if you maybe tell the snap shirt story, because I think it'll really impact a lot of people to hear that.
Oh boy. Well, I don't know if I gave you this background when I told it to you. So I was 17, and by then I'd already concluded that men are bigger and stronger and they'll hurt you. And so I'd already unconsciously taken up disempowering men. And my forte, if you will,
My forte in disempowering men.
Exactly.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
my forte in disempowering men was keeping men off balance. So, you can feel yourself into it. That's a certain way of being disempowered. So it was rarely a direct hit. It was just a sense that if I could tell when a man was on tilt, like he's tilted on one foot, then he couldn't attack. I felt safe when he couldn't get his bearings, when he couldn't keep his act together. That's when I felt safe. And so the way that it manifested in 1978 was going to parties, and I had been challenged by a friend to not drink, and so I wasn't. I was at a. I mean, 17-year-olds shouldn't be drinking anyway, but never mind that. So I wasn't drinking, and I would do it even when I was drinking. So I had a bottle of beer. I had filled it with water, but I had a bottle of beer because I was tired of people asking me why I wasn't drinking. And it was the era of urban cowboy and snap shirts. And
Actually, I'm wearing one. I'm wearing one.
Wearing a snap shirt.
Yeah, I didn't plan this.
Isn't that awesome? Yeah.
Didn't plan it. Yeah.
And I had a particular disdain, if you will, for athletes. To me, they were the most full of themselves, the most like mean and inconsiderate, and so they were my target. And and I think at that particular party, I think I got at least 3, like a couple of swimmers. Oh
man!
And as you know, I would walk up to them and they'd have a beer in their hand, and I'd ask them, could they please hold my beer? And they would go, okay. And they'd reach out and take my beer. Now they had both hands full, and I would just reach out and go, and snap all the snaps on their shirt. And I actually was shocked the first time it happened, because these were, in my view, these were peacocks, right? These were these young men who walked around like, I'm all that. And so when I, ripped open their shirt, revealing their pecs and abs that they worked so hard on, I expected them to be, I thought they'd be cool about it. right? But when they weren't, when instead they went like this, and they've got these two beers, and the beers foaming out of trying to conceal themselves. I thought it was hilarious, and I felt safe, and I felt like I put these. I'll spare the word. I had a bad word for them. I put them in their place, and I just and go on with what I was doing. And it's funny you asked me to tell it to you, because I mean, knowing what I know now, and how much how much the posture, right? How much the posture that I interpreted as such egotism is really more the posture of a warrior on guard. And part of being on guard is to reveal nothing that could be used against you. And women don't know that if you share something meaningful to you with us, and we share it with other people, that we have just revealed you. And that's a betrayal for a man.
Yeah.
And so for me to do that with their shirt and reveal them when they weren't in that state, because literally they were helping me in that moment. Would you hold this for me? Sure. Right? I caught the best part of them and then used it against them. And I didn't know any of that at the time.
Mm-hmm. It's pretty incredible to think that that's where you started doing that, because, I can imagine that there are a lot of women who keep men off balance, or who don't respect men or like men, or have many negative beliefs about men, but would never go so far as to do something like that. Like to actively, it's one thing to say something at a man, to shame a man, like in a checkout line or something like that at the supermarket or wherever it shows up, right? It's something else entirely to walk up to a man and actually rip his shirt open. It's a snap shirt, so you're not ruining his shirt, right? But it's another thing to actually physically interact with a man, and that way to sort of cross that boundary. That's a degree of I can't even fathom that happening. Now, again, it's at a party and stuff like that. And, it's kind of a different kind of environment than just doing it, at the mall or something like that. Like, hey buddy, very different, but still that you were that forward about it and almost unapologetic at the time.
I was unapologetic,
right. And even after the third time you did it, you stopped doing it. But after the third time, was there any feelings of remorse? Like, maybe I shouldn't have done that? Or was it like, yeah, I do this to guys for fun?
Oh, that was just 3 times at that party.
Oh, you just said what? I'm gonna need a minute with that.
I'm sorry. I said I was worse. Yes, I was worse than that. I mean, I had my first crush on a boy when I was 7.
Okay.
and probably even younger. My first real crush would have been with my big brother. You don't think of it as a crush, but
sure.
My brother was 15 months older than me, and I just wanted to be with him. I just wanted to follow around and be with him. There's this amazing space about him, even as a child. Even though sometimes it was so cruel to me, I just would always go back to wanting to follow him around, and I wanted to play with Chris. And my father adored me. He wasn't around much, but when he was so kind. There were things I wanted to do, like I wanted to learn cursive. And at school, they said I wasn't old enough to learn cursive. They wouldn't teach me. And So my dad sat down and taught me how to write cursive. And I think I just always loved men. I always loved boys. I always would rather be with boys than with girls. And I always had one girlfriend, one best girlfriend. But I'd rather play with the boys. You guys do way more fun things than girls.
Sometimes.
And, but that feeling that way made me really vulnerable. And also, if you think of the time when I grew up, right, I was born in 1960. So I was becoming, right? So I was becoming a young woman at a time when the old roles and stereotypes, which my mother was part of, right? A homemaker, and women's liberation, and anything you can do, I can do better, which my mom danced around and sung in the kitchen, and the messages, right? So the message of Barbie dolls, and you can run a truck through her thighs. So thigh gap, right? Barbie doll introduced thigh gap to women and had us believe we're supposed to have that. And just this message from my mother, who was so pissed at my father for not giving her the fairy tale life she thought she was signing up for, and her own intellect that didn't how women were thought of at the time, didn't have a full expression. So she mostly hid it and was conniving. And this message that really, as a woman, you have to have a man. Who's your man? Where's your man? You don't have a man? You gotta have a man. Barbie's gotta have a Ken. And where's Skipper's boyfriend?
Who's Skipper?
Little sister. Skipper's Barbie's little sister.
Oh, okay.
But Skipper didn't get a Ken, right? Barbie had a Ken, blonde Ken, brunette Ken. She could pick her Ken. But Barbie had to have a Ken. So you have to have a man, but don't ever need him. Yes. And
a little bit of double think.
Make sure he knows you don't need him.
Yeah. Mission accomplished.
Yes. Yes. But you can see the conflict, right? You got to have one, but never need him. And then as I started studying men, finding out, and men would just throw it. They would just throw the comment off. They didn't know it was earth-shattering to say something like, well, she didn't need it. She didn't need me. So I looked for someone who did. In direct conflict with what I was taught and what so many women to this day are proving. Like they think that the less I need you, the more attractive I will be to you. Exactly. So we have a friend who used this word, conflate. We have conflated needing and needy.
Oh, that's great.
Yes.
That's great.
And so women are terrified of being perceived as needy, being perceived as weak and needy. And so instead of addressing that, like we started asking men, what does needing mean to you? And the way one man put it was, needy is when you can't handle the basic components of life.
Yes. Yeah.
And that's completely different than never needing something from another human being, never needing help, for example, right? And it's the source of, as gets talked about in the Queen's Code, the source of women not asking for help in a way that's dignified, supportive, empowering. Other people can win at providing it, right? Because we don't ever want to need help. We don't ask for help in a timely way or with respect. And then we end up needing to be saved because we got in over our head. And then we're pissed at the lecture saving comes with, which the Queen Codes illuminate why the lecture. And it just ends up making it worse, right? Getting a lecture for needing to be saved it reaffirms never need a man because there'll be a jerk. Instead of understanding really how huge the difference is and what it means to a man who's instinctually always exercising discipline about a limited amount of time and money and energy, and is really invested in his plans, and something that he's got to interrupt his plan in order to keep someone he cares about from a big consequence. That's going to come with a lecture. If you asked me sooner, I could have planned on this, and I would have been happy to provide it. I didn't know any of that.
Sure. I mean, but as Claudia illustrates in the Queen's Code, that inheritance, and I think that's the power of Claudia as a character, is that she's talking about 9 generations of inheritance about how men work that got lost in Myra's generation, who I assume is the baby boomer generation, right? That's sort of around that time, roughly, right? Like in that, she's probably born around the same time as you are, somewhere in that range, right? That there's all this wisdom. 9 generations is what, like a couple 100 years, 300 years maybe of information about men?
It's even more than that. Generations used to be measured in 25 years, and Claudia's family's been at it for 500 years.
500 years. Okay. So here's 500
generations. Yeah.
So here's 500 years of knowledge about how men work. That is the entire inheritance is just discarded by her daughter. Like whatever, I don't have any need or want for it. And so it's not like Alison Armstrong is conjuring this stuff up out of nowhere. Like you've spent centuries yourself studying men and women and you figured it out. It's like, no, this inheritance, this knowledge about men was there. It was understood how women can relate to men and how men can relate to women and how men can relate to themselves. That's a whole other thing. And it was just thrown out. It was just thrown out in favor of, I like how you said needing versus needy. I like that distinction. The one that I talk a lot about is equality versus sameness. Like that's another thing that gets conflated. And then there's also strong and independent versus soft and self-sufficient. And it's that independent. Like what you're looking for is not a woman who's independent, doesn't need a man, but she can take care of herself. She's self-sufficient, right? And so I really like that you added that third piece, needing versus needy, right? Because there's a big difference for a man in there.
There's a huge difference in can I talk about the independence and self-sufficiency?
Yeah, please.
My mother used to say to me when I was wanting to be married again. So I'd gotten married when I was 23, and that was the man to whom I was, Melissa, because he didn't do anything husbands were supposed to do. And
is that because he actually didn't, or that's because what you thought he didn't? Like Melissa, well, Scott's doing a decent job, but Melissa's just cutting him off at the knees every chance she gets, right?
Well, the important part of my sentence is what I thought he should do.
That's what that's what I was getting at. Yeah.
So he wasn't anything that I thought a husband would be. And he wasn't that way before we got married, but I thought getting married would change him. I thought that minister had fairy dust.
Yeah, it's amazing.
And he would change into a husband. And after we got married and I told him the light had come on in my car and it needed its oil changed. And he said, you should take it to Jiffy Lube. That was my first indication that, no, husbands take care of cars. That's what husbands do. They take care of cars.
Yes, it's written on the stone tablets of husbandry.
Yeah. And so anyhow, when I was wanting to be married, my mother said to me, well, Alison, you may have to give up your precious self-sufficiency and your damn independence.
Oh, interesting. So the two different concepts.
Yeah, and they are in the way that when I created the course that at the time was called Celebrating Men in Marriage, because it was everything I'd learned from men about marriage, and men are actually really intelligent about marriage in a way that women generally aren't, because men take commitment very seriously. Very seriously. And I'm a dictionary girl. So as that course was coming through, again, with all these thoughts that I thought were my own, I looked up independence and self-sufficiency. And women want to be married, but they want to be independent. But independent means free from the influence of another.
Not a good way to be married.
Exactly. And so that's why a man will think this woman could be my wife. She has all the qualities I'm looking for in my wife. And then she tells him about something she's decided. And in her mind, they're not serious enough for him to have the right to an opinion, let alone a vote. So she just decided, she's selling her house. She just decides stuff. And to her, he doesn't have the right to say anything about that. He doesn't have enough status that he deserves to have influence. And she doesn't, women don't know that when she does that, he thinks, oh my gosh, would she do that if we were married? Because to him, it's not about the right to influence. To him, it's about, we're checking out sharing lives together. How do we do things? How do we decide things? How do we solve problems? What do we do when we're upset? This is me seeing do the puzzle pieces fit together, and that free from influence, here's the result. Oh my gosh. Yeah. Marriage isn't about independence. It's about, you honor yourself, but you're not free from influence. Everything about your partner influences your life, whether you like it.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Which is why I think people have very healthy reasons for not getting married. And then self-sufficiency, this is one of the things that I had to interact with women. They want a boyfriend. They even say they want to be married. And they have this value of self-sufficiency, which self-sufficiency is an instinctual value, right? If you can't provide for yourself, right? If you can't handle the normal things in life by yourself, you're going to die. But it all depends on what you're up to in your life, right? Once you commit to something that's beyond an individual's ability to create, self-sufficiency is no longer valid. Like, you know this, and you guys know this. You taught me this. Oh, like my brother's this amazing organic farmer, right? He goes out to his field and he's got this thing that he wants to create. He starts working on it. He's trying to solve a problem, and he gets to a point where he goes, oh, this is a two-man job. And he just concludes that. he's not embarrassed or ashamed of himself for not being able to do it. It's a two-man job, or this is going to take a team. There's no pride of self-sufficiency in it. It's we've taken on something that's beyond my ability to do, and this is my part, and I need people who are able to do these other parts, including I'm not a good team leader. I need someone to lead this team, right? And so it's one of the things that I appreciate so much that I've learned from men, that it's just a fact, right? It's not a judgment. It's just a fact given what you're committed to. And, I'm passionate about partnership. And in our course, Lux, which is online, starts out by saying most people aren't up to anything big enough in their life to require partnership. And we do that on purpose. We keep our lives small enough. We keep our ambitions small enough so that we can be self-sufficient. And it ends up being going from a survival imperative to identity. And so we'll keep limiting ourselves. We'll have an idea to take on something and, but I couldn't do that myself. And we just kill it. I can't do it myself. And so, yes, a certain level of competency, I would call it, in the way that I've put it. Yeah, instead of self-sufficiency, what I've said is, because women are like, oh, men don't like strong women. And I'm like, hello. Instinctually, he's looking, if he's going to partner with a woman, he is looking for the strongest, most competent partner that he thinks he can attract and keep.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And all those parts are important, right? He may see someone who's strong and competent, but left with, I got nothing to give her. Right? Because he's looking for what would she need from me, right? What can I contribute to her? How does she need me to have a better life? And meanwhile, women are concealing what it is that, like I tease women, okay, you're so proud of being self-sufficient. So I want you to make a list of everything you do need a man for. Like, can you rub your own back? Can you hold yourself in your arms and comfort you the way that a man can do? I mean, you guys are awesome. This came up about the Queen's Code last week because there's a part in the first couple chapters where Kimberly is insulted at an effort to be comforted, right? And then I didn't even notice this. One of the participants pointed out, and then later in the same chapter, Claudia is being comforted by Bert. And it had her realize that she doesn't let anybody comfort her. And she really would love to be comforted. And she'd like to ask her husband to comfort her. I mean, geez, talk about something that changes the quality of your life. Comfort. So, yes, there are many things we can be self-sufficient at, and there are so many things that we can't be because they come from another human being.
Right. I like that. I'm not committed to the word self-sufficient. I just like the alliteration with soft and self-sufficient, but you're right. What I'm trying to capture with that is this idea of not needy, right? Yeah. So sufficient meaning not needy, but I like competent as well. Right. Because that's true. Like, we're not looking for women that are completely and totally self-sufficient because, we as men, when we become good men, we recognize that we're not self-sufficient either. And that's a big transition because many men are in this lone wolf kind of mentality. I have to do it all on my own. No one's coming for me. I got to do it all. And it's a big step for a man to get past that and recognize, as you so brilliantly said, if you only take on things that you can tackle as an individual, you're going to live small. Like, you have to be able to work and live in teams and community as a man, because that's how you accomplish great things. Right. And so you have to get past your own desire for lone wolf independence as a man or self-sufficiency and recognize that none of us are as strong as all of us. And that's a point that I try so hard to make to men, because one of the things that I experience is that there are so many men in the men's movement in particular that are like, my version of being a man is the only way to be a man.
Yes.
And that's objectively not true. And you can even see it in like the movie, the Lord of the Rings, right? Aragorn is nothing like Gimli, is nothing like Legolas, is nothing like Frodo, is nothing like Gandalf. These men are not similar, but you recognize them all as men, recognize them all as part of a team. Why are all these kinds of men different kinds of men and all equally valid men, but all men have to look like you, Mr. Content Creator? How does that work? And so I try to encourage men to get to that point where you're, it's interdependence, right? Dependence to independence to interdependence, where you recognize what your limitations as a man are, and you recognize that that guy doesn't have the same limitations, but he has his own, and the two of you together can do much more. And that you tie that also into partnership is very powerful, because it's not something like to ask women today, what do you need a man for? Snap answer, nothing. Right? You know, it's like, it's not, without even hesitation, right? Your face right there, it shows it, right? It's like, well, is that true? Can we dig into that notion that you need a man for nothing? Because I don't know that, and maybe you said this to me, but I certainly heard it recently. It's that men have never said we don't need women. They're you know, there's a small segment of men out there called MGTOW, men going their own way, that say that, but it's very small, and that community has its own problems. But like that women have developed this belief that they don't need men, when men have never developed, like I say, like without women, it's pointless, right? What are we doing? Just go back and get in the cave. Like Bert says that, like men would be content with caves and campfires without women. And it's true. Right. Yeah. So I appreciate you're trying to break down, using the Queen's Code, especially this notion that women don't need men, and getting them to ask, like, what do you think you might actually need a man for?
Yeah. I mean, I could go on and on just on that subject. And, you know, you've met Dan. You've been in his space. He says hello, by the way.
Hi, Dan.
Yeah. And I didn't know until I moved here a year ago how small my life had become, living alone in that huge house, right, in the country. And I didn't realize I was shrinking until I moved here. And I never thought I would leave my house in the country, especially not to move to a city, even though, you know, it's a huge city, has 16,000 people.
Oof. So it's almost got a stoplight.
It has many stoplights. And, you know, I live 34 miles from a stoplight outside of kind of 295 people, right? So, but I got to experience that, and as you know, we don't live together, Dan and I, but I live in the circle of his protection.
Yes. You kind of live together, but not really live together. Yeah, I know what you mean.
Well, I think living together is full of hazards, and it was one of the things I didn't want to do. It was on my list. If I was going to be in a relationship again, not attached to being married or living together full time. And so having my little house on his property and you've actually stayed in this house before it was mine.
Yeah.
I'm in his circle of protection, and I call him the Lord of the Manor sometimes. And, but it's palpable. It's palpable that he's right there. And my encounters with bears last year, the one trying to break down the shutter to get into the kitchen because I was cooking.
Cooking is so good, it attracts bears.
I he was a little guy, but he seems like, when standing up can reach taller than I am, seems really big. And
that is pretty big bear.
yeah. So whether it's critters, and this year it's been raccoons. 5 raccoons so far. That we've trapped. 5 raccoons, some of them timid and some of them snarling and terrifying. But just who I can be because I feel safe. And it's one of the things that towards the end of our Understanding Women course, men who watch it can see it. They can see and get it viscerally. Women responding to this assertion that I've made, that it doesn't matter our sexuality, it doesn't matter our competency. Instinctually, there isn't anything, including a gun, because after Greg died, I went and got one and learned how to shoot it, right? Nothing has us feel safe from an instinctual vibration, able to think thoughts and not others, the whole capacities that come from feeling truly safe. Nothing contributes to that the same way as one man that is for you, that he's got you.
Yes.
Nothing. And I've asked this of thousands of women. Picture how you breathe, what you think, how you feel in your body in the presence of a man is for you. Get present to that. Okay, now how many women does it take to give you the same feeling? And I've watched thousands of women thinking, like, okay, 2, 5, 10, 100, 500, until finally they're all just shaking their heads. There's no number. No number. That one man, just one man.
Yep.
And talk about interdependence, right? That we can contribute that to each other. It doesn't have to be a romantic relationship. It doesn't have to be a sexual relationship. It doesn't even have to be a committed relationship. It can be how you're being with me, sitting next to me on a plane. Like this young man, we were chatting about a bunch of stuff, and then he said, "Excuse me, I have to close my eyes and take a nap now, but I'll be back."
That's cute.
And he leaned against the side of the plane, and he closed his eyes and he went to sleep. And I just thought, where did he learn that?
How old was he?
When he woke up, I asked him, where did you get that from? To reassure me, you're still here, you'll be back, I'm safe. Where did you get that from? Which led to a whole other conversation about his mother. His mother taught him that. Oh my gosh. And if you reverse it, it's the same thing. If I ever want another career, it'll be in customer service, teaching customer service to men, and how that single focus attention that you have on the customer in front of you, if you just take a moment and say, I'll be with you. I'll be with you when I'm done with him, with her, right? Just like, I'll be with you next. Because when we're standing in a line and the man has not acknowledged our presence, we're having our own cave woman attack. He doesn't even know I'm here. I'm going to die. And we get tense. And then by the time we start making bitchy comments, and it's taking so long. It's all out of fear. It doesn't sound like fear, but it's all out of fear. We're just one, I see you. I see you. I'll be with you as soon as I'm done here. Right? It's the same effect as being able to take a number and you see that actually going by the numbers.
Sure. Not random numbers. Yeah.
You wanted to say something?
No, this is very helpful. Because that's one of, and I want to dive into all of these topics and continue on our off-road adventure. But I told myself we were going to talk about the Queen's Code because we could talk about a thousand other things, but I do want to bring it back to the book and the audiobook. And that, I think, to go all the way back to my story for reading the Queen's Code is that I discovered Keys to the Kingdom, and I don't know how. I found it on Amazon. I was overseas at the time. It would have been 2018, maybe late 2017, something like that. And I read the Keys to the Kingdom first because I read it was the first book. So I'll read the first book in the series, right? And and I recognized just how true and real the stages of development in a man's life are because I was on my big 4-year overseas travel adventure. I was in some sort of knight stage, I guess, right? Like I was out slaying dragons, right? And I was like, and that provided such an incredible piece to me of peace, P-I-E-C-E, and peace, P-E-A-C-E, right? At the same time, to recognize that no one had ever told me about the various stages of life that I would go through as a man. And I felt that I was doing something completely, off the beaten path, unusual, irregular, especially compared to all my friends who had settled down and all that stuff, but they had never really had much of a night phase. And here I was trusting my own instinct to say, there's something unfinished in myself that I have to go do. And so when I read that and recognizing, excuse me, and recognizing that, I knew intuitively that as soon as I was done doing that, then I would be ready to begin thinking about a wife and kids. But this had to be done first. Right. And like no one had ever given me that knowledge before, but I knew it in my gut and I trusted it. And I gave up an entire life, in the United States and in San Francisco and California. I pushed all in, put it all on the table and said, I'm going. And I did it. And that was my preparation for being able to have something to offer to a woman later in my life. And I knew that. And then the Keys to the Kingdom, you laid that out. I was like, I'm looking at my life reflected in a mirror.
Wow.
And there's a lot going on in that book. But that's really what I took away. I remember when that landed in my chest. I was like, oh, I'm doing exactly what I'm supposed to be doing. Hallelujah. Praise God for that. Right. Right. And so it was right after that. Like as soon as I finished Keys to the Kingdom, I picked up the Queen's Code. And I'll never forget the experience of reading that book for the first time. Unforgettable to see, to learn so much about myself, but to feel so understood, to feel so completely understood by a woman, and to see so many things, like the way that you read the men in the audiobook now, you nail all of it. Like I'm listening to you saying Bert and Jack and Raoul and their inflection and the tone of voice and the way that the men say the things they're saying. Like, for example, when Kimberly, I don't know, it's kind of spoiler alert, whatever. So when Kimberly says to Jack, like, I'd like for you to be my lover. And Jack's like, no, like not her. I was like, oh, cause I was like, oof. I felt that in my own body when she said that, like, oh no. Right. And I remember that whole experience and Scott, having been many of those different men. And so I remember when I read the book the first time, that not only were the things that Claudia was teaching about men true, right? Like she can say the things, but then the way that all the men illustrated and embodied the truth of them, it was just incredibly powerful experience that showed me a bunch of things all at once. It showed me that it taught me about myself because I didn't have language to describe a lot of different aspects of myself that I felt were true, like the way that a man is recharged around a contented woman. Like I was almost in tears when I read that because I realized how rarely I had experienced it and how true it was. Right. So it showed me these things about myself. It showed me that men could be understood by women, that it's not some dense fog that's impossible to see through, and that men and women can actually relearn, and it is relearn how to relate to each other. And it was this powerfully transformative experience for me that planted a seed in my mind that has taken shape over the past 4 years and deeply informs what we've talked about, which is the Great Reconciliation. And so now I find myself recommending the book regularly, like several times a week, because it's had that much of an impact on my life, as saying, no, we can relearn how to relate to each other as men and women. And there's a way that we can start that process at minimum, if not complete it. And it's in the Queen's Code, which is a big thing. It's a big thing to say.
Thanks.
Thank you.
I think before we started recording, you mentioned the acknowledgement at the end of the book, and
Yes,
my having added the part specifically about the audiobook. And it may sound strange, but I feel blessed because of Greg having crossed the veil, passed, died, left me without taking any of his stuff. Which I have an interesting update for you on one of the things I left behind.
Oh, wow.
That you have film of for the Renaissance of Men. Me in his Porsche, right? Because of his passing, and because of my finally realizing I did want a romantic relationship again. Because for a long time I was like, no, I know how much work they take.
Right.
It takes so much work to be brilliant, and I'm not going to have one that isn't brilliant. So I don't know if I want to do this at all. And then having met Dan 2 years ago and encountering someone with whom it's worth it, right? It's still work. It's still everything I knew it would be. Yet the benefits are astonishing to me. And part of it is that conversation we were having before. Greg was self-sufficient as an identity.
Oh, interesting.
Yes. And so our partnership was limited because most of the things that I offered in order to be of help, in order to be useful, in order to have something go faster, easier, most of what I offered was taken as an insult. Yeah. And so over the years, I offered less and less and less and less because it hurt to be interacted with that way. No, right? Not, no, thank you. No, thanks for offering. No, this isn't it. No, maybe another time. Just no. And this edge to it, this really strong edge to it. And I didn't know how much Greg had imprinted me, right? He was the man that I had a long-term relationship with, almost 30 years together. And even though I'd been married before, my first husband and I spent almost no time together. We were the picture of independence. And so being with Dan, who's a very different person in that he's always played team sports, right? Since he was 4 years old.
Hockey, right?
Yeah, hockey's played team sports and then coached, many, many years coaching hockey. And it's so distinct for him what team is. And we even have a name for our team. We're like Hagstrong Dick Dick.
Dick Dick, yes.
Hagstrong. But there's this really beautiful that I didn't get to experience before, where he is no less by his admiration of my strengths, just as I am no less by my admiration of his.
Yes.
And so, he'll come along and goes, okay, so what's the engineer come up with? How are we going to do this?
So cute.
Yeah, and I just say, well, you're the
That's
engineer,
great.
right? You're the engineer. But then he'll tease me about being vertically challenged, right? But then I'll tease him back. We were walking down the sidewalk and there's an overhanging tree and I walked right under it and he had to duck. I said, now who's vertically challenged?
He remembers that one. That's amazing.
Yeah, but the things that we can do together, like learning to sail, right? Last year, learning to sail together, hugely challenging. And he's amazing on the helm, right? He's just cool as a cucumber and just awesome on the helm. I don't like being on the helm, but I'm a monkey, right? Send me up the mast. Well, under sail, I'm a happy camper, right? I'm just like crazy, like very agile, and this little mountain goat on the boat, and one line for yourself and one line for the boat.
Oh, wow.
Oh, so much fun, right?
It's amazing.
Yeah, and so much fun because there's so little. We're just not proving to each other. We're just not proving to each other. And although there's this funny thing, it goes back to the independence thing, but let me finish what I was saying. So what I'm grateful to for the Queen's Code is I've had to relearn it all. I've had to relearn applied to a very different human being. What does it look like for him? And just like you were talking about, all the characters are unique unto themselves, as are all men. There's no one way to be a man. And yet there are these intrinsic qualities that are so beautiful if you can see them and learn how to work with them. And if you can't, they seem like they're the reason why I can't get what I need from the man. Right? They seem like obstacles instead of strengths. And I love that you get to experience the Queen's Code from the intent, in my intent of women getting to see men's motivations and how beautiful they are. And because of single focus, for example, the effects of testosterone on the brain, things have to be worked with in a certain way or you can't get to the beauty. And the same is true for women, right? Women have such beauty, but if men don't know how much our safety depends on feeling connected, and every time we focus on something else, we feel disconnected and lost, and then we get afraid, and we do all kinds of ugly things. Like be critical. The first time I was critical of Dan, I was trying not to be, but I was really afraid. And we just met. Yeah. And he's like, that felt like criticism. And I stopped taking that a long time ago.
Yeah. I think you told me that story.
That was hot.
Yeah.
And then I burst into tears that I criticized him, the Alison Armstrong, and just criticized a man. And then I was afraid. I just confessed I was afraid, right? And then he was tapping his steering wheel because he was driving. He was tapping, and she sounds like that, she's scared. When she sounds like that, she's scared. She sounds like that, she's scared. And he was memorizing. He was learning me. He goes, okay, so how about if that happens again, I'll remember that you're scared, and then I'll ask what's scaring you. How about that?
Sounds good.
First deal, right? We got our first deal just a few hours into this relationship. And then I was like, well, yeah, but as quick as I can already tell you are, you will probably already figured out the things that scare me. But if you want to ask, that's fine. And then I thought a second, I said, but how about I just come right out and say I'm scared? He's like, oh, that'd be good, right?
Yeah.
Then it has to do with being a passenger in a car, right? It's scary to be a passenger in a car. And
in Colorado.
Especially in Colorado. Yeah. But it was great because a few months later, I was trying to figure out how to ask him to not follow the car in front of us so closely. Even though it'd be a normal place to follow in city driving. I'm not used to city driving and have a thing about tailgating. And I was trying to figure out a nice way to ask that. And then I remembered. And I said, it's scaring me that you're so close to that car. And he goes, oh. And he just...
Amazing. So simple.
So simple, right? Just to tell the truth. But we're trying to, it's the definition of strategy. To move yourself into the best possible position before engaging with the enemy.
Oh, yeah.
Dictionary.
Yeah.
Right? And that's how we are with each other. We're trying to move ourselves into a position where we don't reveal any weaknesses, where we don't reveal any dependency, where we don't reveal anything that we need, which equals a weakness, right? And so much of the Queen's Code is just showing that none of these are weaknesses. They're just part of being human, and how we reveal them to each other makes all the difference in how the other person can respond. Like in that scene that you spoiler alerted, Jack's reaction, and then got out of his reaction long enough to look over at Kimberly and see who Kimberly was being.
Yes.
Right? Which is so much a part of the message that is not stated. It's how we're being with each other is so much more important than how we put things. Right?
Yes.
But women are always asking me, how do I say? And the Queen's Code was about, I knew I could teach women how to speak the language of heroes. But if the beingness of the woman isn't congruent, if she hasn't transformed her relationship to being provided for, her relationship to needing help to accomplish something bigger than herself, her relationship to saving, her relationship, like if she hasn't transformed her relationship to that, even having the words, it's not going to work. Because it's who we're being is louder than everything.
That's what's behind the vow, right? I vow to give up the right to castrate men forever. It's that if you take on the teachings of the Queen's Code, you can put them into your head, and you can express them from your mouth. But if the person who's doing that, if the woman who's doing that hasn't had a true change of heart, like a real commitment to transform her way of being to men, right? Then it's just going to create destruction. And you illustrate that so clearly through the Melissa scene with Scott. It's crushing. It's crushing. Like to feel. I think Scott's reaction in that scene is probably mild compared to what would happen to a lot of men, right? Like he clearly loves her a lot to respond in that way versus just to walk out the door, for example. He's like, okay, right. And this is, again, that's the power of the book, and that my experience as a man reading it, and to learn the hero's language, which obviously I'm not going to give away, and to know intuitively in my own mind and in my own heart, in my own body, that yes, those are the words. Like those are the words that activate me and call me to attention and can truly bring out the best in me, and can also be used against me. because I want to give my strength away as a man. I've worked hard to cultivate my strength as a man. It's a multi-decades long project for a man to get to a point in his life where he truly has the ability to offer himself. Like I offer myself to you, partner, or you, friend, or whoever, right? And here are the keys, like particularly like a wife, right? Fiance, wife, here are the keys to how to bring forth the best in me. And that those same keys can be used to absolutely bring out the worst, right? Or to destroy. You have to have a change of heart as a woman and in terms of how you relate to men in order to take responsibility for those. And then you really get to see men shine, but it costs you something as a woman. You can't get it for free. And that's the power of that vow. It's like, how bad do you want that? How much of yourself are you willing to give to get something from a man that you could never give yourself? And that's where the transformation comes in, that commitment. And it's so inspiring to me to know that there are so many women that are willing to make that commitment, because, the dialogues almost seems to be women who would never be willing to make that commitment. But I know for a fact, millions of women that are like, yeah, we're over this independent, self-sufficient thing. Those guys over there, they do things differently over there. Maybe we have something to learn from them, and maybe they have something to learn from us. Let's give that a shot.
Maybe there's a good reason for our differences.
Yeah, maybe.
Well, what you said, there's so many things that it sparked in me. Further along in the book, which we referred to, where Bert is trying to unwind what's happening to Claudia and her health.
Yeah.
He's really worried about her. And then he finally pinpoints it. And it's the first time that this concept of accountability shows up.
So important.
It's so important. And it's one of the most underestimated contexts, and one of the ways that women unconsciously reduce men. I interacted with an organization, and their job is transformation. That's the business, is transformation. And the founder died, and his wife took over. And when I went to be a speaker there, I was so saddened because I watched this crew of women who were all in the leadership positions interacting with men as helpers. Yeah. And they didn't even know. They didn't even know how much they were emasculating these amazing men around them, who, if they just released the accountability to that expertise, instead of managing and micromanaging everything, like these guys were really good helpers that they loved very much. They're like good dogs, and it was demeaning. Right?
Yeah.
And in a course that we haven't gotten to have since the beginning of COVID, called the Dance of Partnership, accountability is the first topic in the context of partnership. And I make fun of us that accountability has become there's a lot of status associated with accountability. And that the more that you're, quote, in charge of, the more important you are. And that one of the things that's wearing women out is we will make ourselves accountable for anything and everything. And we don't stop and think, is this my part? And we're just merely, we don't even want to. We're just merely willing to be accountable because we're afraid of what will happen if we're not. We don't know that maybe 2 steps behind us is someone for whom that would be a privilege to be accountable. And it's one of the things that women don't know about men, that language, would you do me the honor of being my wife? Would you do me the honor of marrying me? That he's asking to be accountable for taking care of her in certain ways. And Melissa interacting with Scott in the Queen's Code, she has no idea what he holds himself accountable for.
Mm-hmm.
With his children, with her, with all the people at work that he mentors to be successful in their own careers. Like he has a huge capacity. And all she sees is he doesn't take out the damn trash.
Yes.
Right? Yeah. And I asked the first time I led the Dancer partnership, and we were talking about, I call them accountability hoes and hogs. That was Owen Hagen.
Okay.
and
you just have this way of putting things, Alison. It's so good.
I try to make things memorable, right?
You succeed.
Like pumpkin hours. Pumpkin hours are memorable,
Yes.
right?
Yes. Dessert, pumpkin hours, all of that. It's like,
yes, exactly.
Yeah.
And maybe that's my contribution to the Queen's Code, to the movie.
I think there's more than that.
So I asked, I'd say I'm receptive and obedient. Those are my star qualities to all of the things that are wanting to get through. So I asked this group, asked the men in the group, okay, what's it like for you for women to keep taking all the accountability and leaving nothing for you? At most they want your help, but they'll never ask you to be accountable or entrust you with accountability. And this one man stood up, he was probably in his 50s, and he said, it's like training for something your entire life and then not be allowed to do it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's what you said earlier, right? Like this, how you've known yourself to be all your entire life, but no one calls you, right? You've developed your strength. That's so much what being a knight is about, is actually developing and testing. How good am I? Oh, I want to be good at that. Now, how good am I? Now, how good am I? Right? And it's awesome, right? And then after you put yourself to the test of all these things, then being a prince, you could say is, okay, now how am I going to use this to build something?
Yes.
All these things that I created in myself. So yes, accountability. I imagine accountability is going to show up in the third book. It's something we just arrived at near the end of the Queen's Code, and it's huge. It's huge. One of the things we said is that the power and possibilities of a partnership are determined by what each of the partners are being accountable for being, listening, and speaking.
Say that one more time just to make sure that they get. So I like what they're being accountable for. Say that all again, if you don't mind.
The power and possibilities of a partnership are determined by what each of the partners are being accountable for being, listening, and speaking.
Yes. Okay. Yes.
Yeah. Including being accountable for letting another person be accountable.
Yes.
You can count on me to let you do your part, to entrust you to do your part, to support you doing your part. And it's your part.
This is massive because I don't want to. One of the things that I run into writing about men is I don't want to oversell men because I believe in the best of men, but a lot of men really need to learn accountability. Like that's a lesson that a lot of men, and that's part of what the Renaissance of Men is about. That's part of what the men's movement is about generally is, no, man, you like individual man, you need to begin being accountable for even more things than you're already accountable for. The very small life that you're accountable for, you can be much more accountable and take it, and you can bear that weight of it. And so I think that there's been I know that there's been a weakening of going on of men that has forced women to take on accountability in response. And I would say these are the result of societal forces that you and I could spend a lot of time unpacking. Like, I don't think it's all personal. I think we're caught up in some historical flows that we're kind of fighting against the stream. We'll got the thinking cap on.
Well, can I say one thing about it? Because it's integral.
Yes, you can. What's that?
It's integral to what the Queen's Code is about, because as women disempower men,
yes,
we weaken you.
Yes.
And then we feel the weakness in you.
Yes.
And part of feeling that weakness makes us feel safer. Now, you can't hurt me.
Yes.
But the other part of that weakness has us take over.
Yes.
Again, to make ourselves feel safe. It's all about feeling safe. So we disempower you to feel safe. But then because we've disempowered you, we have to fill in and take over to have ourselves feel safe, which the stepping in and taking over also is emasculating.
Makes it worse.
Withholding accountability is one of the biggest ways that women emasculate men, or that any men emasculate each other, right? Or even themselves. So, this spiral down, right? And in our work on partnership, I start with accountability, and we start with the first person to become a partner of is yourself. And
it's huge.
And where I start with accountability, which is one of what I call the 14 extraordinary choices, also known as 14 elements of partnership, is actually starting with getting clear about what you're unwilling to be held to account for.
Amazing. Are these the 14 things that all have to happen simultaneously? We touched on this in our last conversation.
Gosh, yes. Yeah. They do. And they're each radioactive. But here's the thing that related to the Queen's Code that I would be thrilled for men to do. Because what happens is women are trying to hold men to account for acting like women.
The perfect person, the perfect woman.
And
I'm terrible at being that.
You're terrible at being that. But this is what happens. We're trying to hold you to account for acting like a woman, and you refuse to be held to account for acting like a woman, which has women think you refuse to be accountable for anything.
Yes.
It's too subtle. It's too subtle. Women don't get it. When a man's like, no, you can't count on me for that. Well, then I can't count on you for anything. Instead of quit trying to count on me to act like a woman, and you'll find out what you can count on me for, which the Queen's Code is about what women can count on men for, especially when we stop trying to hold you to account for what you can't be counted on for.
Yes.
Which is doing what a woman would do.
Yes.
Yeah. But as long as we're down your throat about you're supposed to see what I see and do what I would do and do it perfectly, we can't ever see how much men love to be count-onable. And
for the things that men are count-onable as for men.
As a man, or even individually. So Greg would do this thing where he would figure out how far I was going to go. And then he would make sure my car had enough gas to get there and back. So he monitored my gas tank. Imagine 20 years of this.
Sure. Okay.
And at one point I asked him, I said, I love that I don't ever have to worry about gas, that I don't ever have to put gas in my tank. How would you like me to appreciate you for that? And his response took my breath away. He said, if you took that for granted, it would tell me that you know who I am.
Mm.
It opened up this whole other area of there are things that we appreciate about people, and it's actually insulting the way that we appreciate it. Oh, you're such a wonderful man.
Mm-hmm.
No, I'm a man.
Yes.
Don't you get that? Like
Mm-hmm.
there's this insult in what we won't take for granted, what we won't count on you for. Now, do I think we don't need to appreciate things? No, I got a whole thing on that. Appreciation is so important, but someone's currency of appreciation matters. And there are things that where we're insulted, and I've experienced it myself, like that you think you can't count on me for that and make such a big deal out of it is insulting to me.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so that's what
I can do much more than just that.
Yes. And so that's one of the things for men to own is this is what you can count on me for. And if you just count on me for it, then I'll know you know who I am. And that's respect.
That's a
These
pretty
are
big
things
insight.
that would be extra on top of what you can count on me for. And this is how to
That's
ask
the minimum.
you for it. And this is how to appreciate you for it.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And then as one man said, don't ask me for what I can't provide.
Yeah, that's
Ask
cool.
me for what I can provide, and I'll give you all I've got. So women keep asking men to provide being a woman. Like Jack starts out in the very first chapter. Women these days want a man to be a man and a woman, to be their boyfriend and their girlfriend. How come they don't know it doesn't work that way?
And men try that. That's the thing, though, is that I'm glad that you mentioned that, because some men do accept accountability for being like a woman. And it weakens men. They try, like me. I tried that for many years.
Yes.
And women don't actually like it, right? That's the thing. It's like, okay, I'll give you the thing that you want, and you hate it. And so I can't win, right? It's really tough. And
Yeah.
I want to stay on that for just a second, because there's a tendency in a lot of men and the men's movement to look at guys who act like that and judge them very harshly. And there's a lot of that. And there's a lot of the ways that men can be cruel and judgmental to each other. Right. But I like the way that you frame it. It's that these men are being accountable for the things that the women in their lives are holding them accountable for. And so they're actually being accountable, but in this inverse, upside down kind of way. It's not that they're unaccountable. They're doing the best they can with the source that they feel is authoritative, right? Unfortunately, which needs to change. And that's a whole thing.
Mm-hmm.
But they're actually being accountable. Now, there are some men that are not being accountable for anything, and that's a separate conversation. But there are a lot of men out there that are trying to be the safe, nice, girlfriend kind of boyfriend. Like they're trying to do that because they think it's right and they're being accountable for it. It just doesn't work. And to be able to see that, to make that discernment and say, this man is actually trying the thing and he's succeeding. He's succeeding at the wrong thing, but he's trying, right? And to ease up on some of those guys and to be able to see them more clearly.
Oh boy, you just said so much. Sorry. There's like 10 sumo wrestlers trying to get to the door at the same time.
That's how I describe my brains. All the little kids trying to get off the bus at the same time.
That's so funny. That's really funny. So, okay, so I'm gonna start with this part.
Okay.
There's a man, his name is Curtis, who volunteered and got trained to teach our material, and he volunteered in the Understanding Women course. I think 13 times was the last time that I knew.
Wow.
And I noticed in the last few times that I was around him that he had changed in not a good way. And that my sense of him was that he was a volcano about to explode. And I had the kind of relationship with him that I could talk to him about it. Like, Curtis, what is this? And it changed how I led that course, because what he said was, well, after being at this course and finding out how much safety matters to bringing out the best in women, I have taken on accountability for making women feel safe.
Yep.
And I could see, I mean, it was just like, right? That him taking on accountability for making women feel safe, he was literally suppressing his own self-expression.
Yes.
He wasn't telling his truth. He wasn't being his truth.
Yes.
And that was this volcano that was building up. And I got it. And for anyone, if you do the Understanding Women online course, which is 11 hours of life changing, you'll see that I never say that anymore. And I even warn the men, do not take on making a woman feel safe. I know it hurts you how scared we are. I know you never want us to be scared, but don't make yourself accountable for making women feel safe, because you can't make women feel safe. At the most, you can help a woman to feel safe, but ultimately it's up to her to choose. Because from an instinctual standpoint, there's never safe enough. Just like as a man, you've never produced enough. There's no instinct that kicks in, okay, I've produced enough. No, get out there and hunt again and again and again, right? And for us, we're never safe enough. We have to consciously override our own instincts and decide, I'm safe enough. And men can help us to feel safe, but you can't make us feel safe. And when finding out all the wackadoodle behaviors that come from women not feeling safe, it has you want to be able to make us feel safe, because you love the beauty of women and anything you can do to get it, including, just listen and respond like a girlfriend would, instead of saying, that's a crock of shit. You have a nail in your forehead.
Yes.
It is about the nail, darling.
Yes.
So it's understandable. Women have browbeat into what's going to be attractive to me, what's going to be necessary to me is if you act like this. But unfortunately, the decision to do that, and then a man is suppressing his own truth, which is the source of your strength, that's perceived by a woman as a weakness, and you'll be our best friend, but we never want to have sex with you.
Yes.
Never.
Yes.
Because women respond sexually to the perception of strength. And a man standing up for himself, and if you can stand up for yourself early and maybe more quietly so it doesn't scare the crap out of us, then we can just perceive the strength in it and think you're so hot, instead of betray yourself, and then the volcano explodes. Yes. And that is so threatening, right? You're going to get a fight, flight, or freeze response, all of which are masculine. Emasculation comes in every one of those responses. So the being true to yourself from the very beginning, it goes back to this, okay, so if I was being true to myself, what would I be accountable for? And what would I allow other people to hold me to account for? In fact, if they did hold me to account, that would tell me they know who I am. It would be respect to hold me to account for that, because I'm choosing to be accountable. And telling that truth, including, and these are the things you can't count on me for. Even if you think a better man would be accountable for it, it's not true for you.
I hope all the guys are listening, right? This is not the message that's delivered to many men, or that many men receive, right? Many men receive the message, rightfully or wrong. And I think it's objectively true that you receive this message, that you are responsible men. And I think this is out there in culture. You as men are dangerous, and you are responsible for making women feel safe. And in order to do that, you have to declaw and defang yourself and remove any notion of your strength at all. And as soon as you do that, women will feel safe, and then they will want you. Right. And I can't tell you how hard I did that. I can't tell you the number of times I had women say, "Will, you're a beautiful man," and then completely ignore me. Right. Like I'm doing all the things, and it's not getting the response that I was told. I'm doing what I'm supposed to do as a man, and it's not getting the response that I was told I was going to get.
Yes.
Right. And I'm very fortunate that I came from myself. Right. And I had the opportunity to meet men who sent me in another direction, who sent me in the direction of things that I had essentially shamed out of my own existence. And one of the books that really does that for men is the book No More Mr. Nice Guy by Dr. Robert Glover. Have you heard of this book?
Yes, but I haven't read it.
The entire dynamic that you're talking about with this guy being a volcano, Curtis, like that's the exact same image that Dr. Robert Glover uses, where it's like men, they suppress what's true for them, and they become very nice, right? They present in this very nice way, very non-threatening, but the truth of who they are gets suppressed, and then explodes and comes out sideways. And Jordan Peterson talks about this as well. There's nothing more dangerous than a nice guy, because you don't actually know who he is. And then I'm talking to friends, other women in my life that are saying that are getting around nice guys and how anxious these nice guys make them feel. Right? Like, I don't know where this guy is at. It's like, but this is the message that so many men receive, is that you have to be nice. You have to be nice. But what they don't say, which is what you just said, that there's no amount of that you can ever truly make a woman feel safe, that she has to be responsible for her own feelings of safety and her own innate anxiety. Like, to whatever degree she has that, she needs to be in control of that. And it's not your responsibility, man, to defang, declaw, and castrate yourself so that she feels safe, because you can never disempower yourself enough to make her feel safe. And you'll actually end up doing the opposite. That's some stuff right there.
Yeah, that's some stuff right there. That's awesome how you said that. Yeah, you can't ever do enough of it. Can't ever go in the wrong direction for too long, unfortunately. I mean, you and I, we got here before, right? With what you call the Great Reconciliation. And what I discovered and what shows up in the 3rd chapter of the Queen's Code, that when I was asked to stop castrating men, my first response was, well, then how do I protect myself?
That's right.
And then as I felt into what Ellen Hurst was asking me, I saw that I would never know, like intimately, I would never know my own power as a woman as long as I was stealing power from men. That my ability to take men's power was not the same as having power. And that until I stopped stealing power from men, I wouldn't truly know my own. Yes. And it's interesting because when we get to it, as many differences as there are between men and women, and I can catalog encyclopedias.
There's a few, one or two.
Just a few. The sameness is the truth of the admiration and respect, and even really liking another human being, begins with us each, men and women, men or women, that we treat ourselves in a way that causes us to experience respect and admiration and liking ourselves.
Yes.
That when we hold ourselves to what we've decided to be accountable for, then we interact with other people with seeking what can we count on them for, and respecting them for that, right? And liking them for who they are, and admiring them for the ways they're true to themselves. But until we're interacting in that whole domain, we're never going to have the connections that we're looking for.
Yes.
And there's something that I want to give to your people.
Okay.
Okay.
Yes.
So we'll figure out how to give it, the how of giving it to your people.
Okay.
It's a webinar that I recorded summer of 21 when I lived here.
Mm-hmm.
I'd lived here for about 8 or 9 months and had kept trying to adapt to something I needed. I kept trying to not need it.
Mm-hmm.
And as I kept trying to not need it, my version of being nice, right? I was being nice about something. And then I would be the volcano that erupted about every 6 weeks because I really needed something to change and I was trying to get over it. And it was something I presented to Dan before I ever met him. I stated this need and then I was incongruent with it. And as a result of it, I produced something called Own Your Ultimatums.
I remember you talking about this. Yes.
Yes. And the subtitle is A Grown-Up Conversation with Alison Armstrong about what you can't live with and can't live without. And it's not long. It's not a long program, but it's one, I think it's one of the most important that I've ever done because it has us come to terms with ultimatums, which ultimatums are considered a bad word, right? That sounds like an ultimatum. You're giving me an ultimatum. And what it unwinds is the problem is not with ultimatums. And an ultimatum means your final offer. Mm-hmm. The problem is people, first of all, not being clear about their ultimatums. And secondly, that when we present our ultimatums to another person is when we sense that they are attached enough to being with us to cave.
It's a weapon.
Yeah. We don't reveal what we need to be all in this, to stay, and whatever it is, whether it's as an employee, an employer, romantic, as a parent providing for a child, we don't reveal the ultimatum until we sense the other person will submit to it because of how much they love us, how much they need us, how much they value the work that we do. That then they'll finally cave to our ultimatum. And that's why it pisses people off because of what a manipulation it is.
It's coercive.
Instead of leading with them. I have a student in our Smart Singles Intensive who came to pride himself on being the most quickly unliked man in online dating.
That's a dubious thing to be proud of.
He was so proud of himself because he was being so true to himself and putting up front what he was looking for, up front what he required, and not budging no matter how attractive he found the woman to be. And meanwhile, he was also learning to understand women and how to help them feel safe while being true to himself. And he really prided himself on how quickly he got unliked, meaning he didn't have to go to any trouble to interact with people who ultimately couldn't give him what he needed, who wouldn't take into account for what he wanted to be held account for and what he was unwilling to be held account for. Go away if you're going to try to hold me to account for that. I'm not that man.
Got it. Unliked, not disliked. There's a difference.
Yes. Unliked, like him and then start to interact and then disappear.
Yes.
And he loved it. It was because he was 100% true to himself from every single interaction, true to himself, which is what Smart Singles is about. Honor yourself first or all is lost. And so leading with your ultimatums, the Own Your Ultimatums, it's the beginning of that. It's the beginning of, yes, you may be rejected, but get rejected when you care more about liking yourself than being liked by somebody else. When you care more about respecting yourself than being respected by somebody else. In other
Yes.
words, when
Yes.
you're more loyal to your own requirements, when you care the least about what they think about what you need, instead of saving it for when you care the most.
Yes. Yes. This flies in the face of what a lot of men are taught, which is they're not taught that you as a man are allowed to have standards, right? Like that is a controversial idea. There's nothing that causes more friction in a lot of online circles than a man saying, these are my standards. It's like, no, you just have to accept me as I am. If you love me, you have to accept me as I am. Right. And there's a degree in which, delivering the ultimatum, that's the coercive element, right? Where that shows up later versus if a man or woman can go through the exercise up front. And I think that's at least half of the power of it is to know what they are for yourself, even before you meet somebody. Like you're walking around carrying this knowledge inside yourself of what your ultimatums are. Like how deeply empowering relationally. Me and my people gladly will receive that gift.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then the challenge is to keep being congruent. I presented my ultimatums early. And then I was incongruent in trying to be nice and get over one. So I was sending these mixed messages. It was very confusing to begin. That I would blow up about this every once in a while, but in between I was incongruent. The ultimatum was a healthy diet and lifestyle.
Yeah, I remember you telling me. Yeah.
Right? And I'd watch him put crap in his mouth, feel terrible, look terrible, have low energy, right? But I wouldn't say it when he was doing it. I would just get upset about it every once in a while, going, I told you this before we ever met. I require being with someone who has a healthy diet and lifestyle. Mm-hmm. But then in between, I'd be inconsistent.
Yeah.
A disservice, right? Being nice is a disservice. Being kind, congruency is kind. Truth is kind.
Yes. It's vital. And that's a distinction that a lot of men are beginning to learn is that the opposite of nice isn't mean. If you stop being a nice guy, you don't become a mean guy, because a lot of men, they worry. This is the metaphor that I give the men that I work with, because I run into this problem often. A lot of guys worry that if they pull the sword from the stone, right? They've sacrificed their own power. Then they pull the sword. They ask themselves, not in these words, but if I pull the sword from the stone, who will I become? Will I become a tyrant? Right? That's their worry, because they've seen powerful embodied men before be tyrants, either from childhood and maybe not even like major league tyrants, but they've experienced a strong embodied man, say, crossing a boundary, even accidentally. And like, I don't want to be that. And so to paint the picture for them, first of all, that you're even worried about that is proof that you won't become that, because you are the conscientious man who can pull that sword from the stone. But the ability to paint the difference in language between niceness and kindness really helps crystallize it. Like you'll stop being a nice guy, but you will become a kind man, right? Which is a far better posture of strength and being, but you have to risk something to do that. You have to risk actually having the sword in your hand. And you have to be the kind of conscientious man that now doesn't keep your power locked away, but that keeps it in check and knows where to use it productively. It's a whole greater degree of self-responsibility. And when I paint that metaphor for them, they get it. It doesn't mean they stop being afraid, but they still get it, because they're taught that the difference between kindness, the opposite of kindness, is meanness. And that's absolutely not the case. But no one's ever painted the picture for who they'll be as a fully embodied man, that you don't lose the best parts of yourself when you take your power on. You enhance them and bring them to reality and into manifestation.
Yay.
Yay. I want to be sensitive to your time, but I have three questions okay. So, and I'll tell you what they are up front. I got a couple of questions from women that wanted to ask you about the keys to the kingdom. And then I have a question about these 14 different things, because it came up in the last conversation. And I think that you've teased apart the pieces of the great reconciliation. And I wanted to bring it up last time, but I didn't get, like, it was one of those things, like I watched it go away in the conversation. Like, no, come back. So I want to get to that. But the first question that I got from one of my listeners is, in the keys to the kingdom, you lay out the stages of a man's development where a man doesn't feel able to provide for a family, and that the woman has to be patient while the man gets to the point where he can become a provider, that he has to feel comfortable within himself. And what this listener asked is, what if there's a biological component that's an urgent need, like physiologically for her, and he doesn't feel like he's there yet? How can she communicate with him? Or what's the dialogue that goes in there? It's like, hey, I know that you feel like you're 2 years away. It'll be significantly different for me 2 years from now. It's like, how does she have that conversation? What should she say? How does that take place?
Well, there's a lot of inquiring to do. And it goes back to our conversation about self-sufficiency. Because a man being ready for something, he's interacting with his own self-sufficiency. Can I handle this? Can I deliver this? Can I be all that I need to be? There are things that become possible in partnership that are unthinkable in self-sufficiency. Can I raise a child? No, I'm not ready to raise a child. Okay, but are my wife and I ready to raise a child? Do we have sufficient communication skills? Are we aligned? Have we had all the conversations about how we would do that? Like, can I have confidence in us? I may not have complete confidence in myself, but I have confidence in us. And I know she brings out the best in me, and I keep rising to the occasion. And I know she has a limited reproductive life cycle. So there's some give and take we got to get here. Okay, honey, there's this one thing I got to do in the business before I know I'll have enough bandwidth to be your partner in parenting a child. And I want to be your partner. I don't want you to be left raising your children because I don't have enough bandwidth to keep a roof over your head. I got to get this one thing done. Which then her question can be, so how can I support you? Instead of, that's stupid, right? You invalidate what someone says they need, that end of conversation, right? So there's things that are possible. And then I've interacted with a lot of women because wanting to be a biological parent is a very strong instinct. And it is endangered much earlier in women's chronological lives than women know. It's why women start getting wound up at about age 29, because that's when the body is recognizing the lower levels of estrogen and testosterone, which are provided by the ovum, and they're disappearing, right? Yeah. And so those lower levels are registered as this is an emergency biological need. And we talk about that in Understanding Women. And there are things that can be done if there's truly a joint desire and truly a conflict, for example, to harvest and fertilize eggs, but implant them 2 years later. There are things that can be done, but it's something, this goes back to that ultimatums thing. We need to have the when of having children conversation way before.
Way before 30. Yeah.
Way before even getting married. Do you know, it's something I'm proud of my son for, by the way. 2 years ago, he said, I'll be ready to have children in 10 years. He'll be 42 when he's ready to have children. And he's very methodical and thinking about, these are the moves I need to make now in order to be ready to do that when I want to do it. And so men have so many plans we don't even know about that we have to be very safe to find out about.
Yes. Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So I would say how to have that conversation was that with with a heck of a lot of respect and being very clear what her needs are, where her boundaries are, and have them backed up by facts, not just feelings. Go to the doctor, ultrasound my ovaries. What's my biological life here? Right?
Yeah.
I was so happy when I found out I had plump ovaries. More than I was supposed to have at 42 years old. So that would be my answer to that question. What's your next question?
Well, just to tag on, my response to the man in that situation, if I could speak to him, would be there is a component of wait until you're ready, but men also can fall into a trap of never feeling ready for anything, family, whatever. Like, I'm not ready. It's like there is a component of no, you throw yourself off the cliff and you figure it out on the way down, and making a commitment to a wife and a family has the way of turbocharging men's focus and productivity, because now I think a switch gets flipped in a man's mind. It's like, now I'm responsible and I've made the commitment to be responsible for something and someone beyond myself. And that only in that leap can you find the strength to do that. So if you're waiting for some external or even internal thing to change and then I'll be ready, no, like the actual doing of it creates the readiness. So that's one of the teachings that's going around for men. So women have there's a dialogue component where it's like, well, honey, what do you actually need to feel ready? And to have him say, make it concrete and a specific thing. How can I help you achieve that? And then that triggers a little accountability switch. Like, oh, wow. Okay. That creates, something tangible to work with. And so that's a, rather than a woman strategizing, well, how do I confront the enemy about this? It's like, no, you can just say, and for the man to have faith in the strength of the partnership and the strength of himself and his brothers, I think is powerful as well.
Yes. Well, and what you're touching on is also one of the obvious answers. What normally happens between men and women, it will seem like the man has to count on himself because he's not winning as a husband. How is he going to win as a father with the same person?
Oh, good point.
Yes. Huge risk, right? He's already taken on providing for her and he's not winning at it, mostly because she won't let him. It all becomes entangled. And my son's father actually said to me once that he thought that it was a good thing I'd gotten pregnant because he thought he would never have been ready.
Okay, got it. Yes.
Yeah. He thought he never would have been ready. And when we got divorced was when he actually dedicated himself to fatherhood.
Okay.
Yeah, it was interesting. Yeah. What was your next thing you wanted to ask about?
Next question. I have been following your work from the beginning of my 10-year marriage. Your teachings, I believe, are why I'm still married. I also use the principles with my son. I always boost him up with appreciation, and I do my best to not interrupt him when he talks, although this one is hard for me. What other tools do you recommend while raising a 10-year-old son?
It goes back to our conversation, Will, about accountability or count-on-ability. And one of the things that we paid attention to is how someone relates to an accountability has everything to do with how they're going to interact with it. So it's like a scale, like unwilling to be accountable. We try to hold people accountable who are unwilling to be accountable. That's the lowest level. Duty would be the next level. It's my duty as a son. It's my duty as a father, as a brother, as an employer. Duty is a form of accountability, but at that level, it's always going to be only to the standard of the person who thinks it's a duty. They're going to do the minimum of their duty.
Okay.
Up from that is willing to be accountable, but it'll be under certain conditions. And then up from that is a request to be accountable. Please pick me, give that to me to take care of. And it may be give that to me to take care of because then I'll know it's taken care of, right?
Mm-hmm.
or maybe give that to me to take care of because I have a vision for it, right? Because I'm capable at that. I can get the job done for the whole team. And then up from requested, I mentioned before, is privileged. It would be a privilege to be accountable for that. And as young as probably 4 or 5 years old, it's appropriate to interact with young people. I don't call them children on purpose, with young people about what they can be counted on for and what I need to be able to count on you for. Are you willing to take that on and be interacted with as count onable? And how could I support you since you're committed to being count onable for that? What do you wish you were entrusted with? That was your job around here. You see life. What do you wish was your job? I wished mowing the lawn was my job. But I was a girl, and those jobs were given to boys in the 60s. I didn't get to mow the lawn or clean the pool. I got to vacuum and dust.
Okay.
You can imagine my late 50s when I got to work on my dad's car with him. How excited I was to be painting the calipers on his car, the matching red.
Mm-hmm.
Dad, I'm working on the cars with you. Because the boys got you. So funny. So
That's beautiful.
Yeah. I mean, what he'll be empowered by is being known that he's counted on for what he wants to be counted on for. And even what he'd like to grow into being counted on. It's tremendously empowering to young people to be held to account. They're so much smarter and more able and powerful and capable than we give them credit for. And that's the way that we masculate them.
Yes, especially
You're
little
just
boys.
a kid, you're a typical teenager. I didn't have typical teenagers at all. I never went through
You
that
wouldn't.
teenage thing. Well, but I held my kids to account for behaving in particular ways. I never punished because punishment is baloney. They only ever had real consequences in life. They weren't punished. The desire to punish is deadly. And punishment doesn't work. Consequences, real consequences, actual consequences. Like if you don't go to school, you end up with a lot of homework to do.
Yeah.
I didn't make my kids go to school. They decided to go to school because it was easier to do homework while the teacher was talking about stupid stuff in the middle of class. Anyhow, accountability. I recommend accountability.
That's great. Yeah, it's calling to the archetype. Another book that you might enjoy if you haven't read it is King, Warrior, Magician, Lover by Robert Moore and Douglas Gillette. That's another one. It's like calling to that king archetype even within a boy, calling forth not just when I hear the word duty, I think of something beyond minimum, but I hear in your hierarchy of, that what I think of duty is the privilege to do something. Like this is my duty, but yes, that there's this hierarchy of accountability where at the highest level, like I would be privileged to take that on, to give a young boy the opportunity to perform to that standard. I mean, that would be life-changing stuff for a little boy, especially if you give him the tools to do it well. Right. And he has a father and a mother who supports him in that, I mean, absolutely foundationally formative for his self-esteem and self-respect.
Yes. And every word in the language of heroes applies to boys. I've seen it affect a 1-year-old. The word hero.
Oh, wow. Wow.
Yeah, never heard it before. Responded. The essence of what it is, men already know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it works even with young boys as well, which is such a profound truth about men, that it's part of us, right? It's not something that Alison came up with, and now that all men have to be taught, and then we learn. Oh yeah, it's like no, you've touched on something that's fundamental and permanent and true in the essential masculine makeup of men. And that was the power of it. When I read it, it was like looking into a mirror. And it's still like looking into a mirror, like listening into a mirror, right? and that's the amazing part of it. Like, and you talked about in the very beginning that you channeled the material, or it was given to you, whatever the language is. It's a gift. It chose to come through you into the world, and the proof of that to me is that it's also blessed you and your life. Yes. Right? Like you received it, and it continues to change and transform you and the men who are in your life, and the women who are in your life as well, like in your personal life, and me. And so that's the surest testimony to the essential goodness of what you've discovered.
Thank you. Mm-hmm. But if I could say something to be complete, your question from the Father about appreciation, there are different currencies of appreciation. And we often express appreciation in our own currencies, and it may not register over there. So it's really important to find out, how do you like to be appreciated? And accountability can be a form of appreciation. Or it can be insulting. Haven't I done enough for you? Yeah, it's one of the things that we have to be sensitive about interacting with. Would you feel appreciated if that became your job? Oh, yeah, right? Like, you value me, you trust me. My job? No, that was fun to do this time. Give me something else to do. Something else to try. Okay, what was the third question?
The third question I've been waiting a year to get to. Save the best for last. Well, here's the thing with the Great Reconciliation that I had realized. It would have been around when we met, or after, something like that. But it was before we had that first podcast conversation. I recognize that in the Great Reconciliation, both men and women have to step into the circle at the same time. There can be no you go first. It's like we both have to step into the circle at the same time and let go of a lot in a spirit of faith and mutual trust and mutual love. That it's not just women, it's not just men, it's both. It's happening simultaneously, right? And the profound risk of trust and love and faith that's embodied in all that. And when you said that, I realized that in that moment, it sounded to me as if you had taken apart the Great Reconciliation, all the pieces of it. And I was like, oh, what's that about? And I wanted to ask, and I didn't ask because the conversation, of course, we went on our big rambling off-road journey, and that whole conversation, and then 4 hours had gone by, and it's like, and it was gone. And so I've had that thought in my mind for over a year now, wanting to talk about that specific thing, that somehow it seems that you and I are looking at the same thing. And that you see that you being you and studying men and women the way that you do, you see things at such a high resolution that I haven't been able to explore. But there's something in that. There's something similar that you and I are looking at. So I wanted to talk to you about that. And I don't know if you can talk about what those 14 things are, if it's in a course, or what you can say about them, but please tell me. It's been this giant mystery in my head.
So those 14 things are in a course.
Okay.
And I would propose to do them justice, that you and I have a different time to talk about them.
Okay.
And accountability is one of them. By choice is the way I would put it. Accountability by choice, not what people are trying to hold us to account for. Sufficient clarity. There's a sufficient amount of clarity that's required. But I want to say something about the step into the ring at the same time, because there's two sides of it. The intent of my work directly on partnership, which those 14 choices are, is for people to embody those choices. Interesting that you use the word embody. for people to embody those choices such that they become what I call an invitation to partner.
Mm-hmm.
So we can't make people partner, and not everyone is suited to partner, and we don't need to partner about everything in life. We don't need to exclude self-sufficiency. I think of human beings as particle and wave. And
The engineer.
we need to take care of our particle in order to be a contribution to available waves. And some waves we participate in, and it's also possible to lead a wave, which is called transformation. Transformational teachers lead waves. And so to be an invitation to partner doesn't mean you're always going to get a yes. But until you're an invitation to partner, you can't get a yes. And so this is to your we have to step in at the same time. We can't control another stepping in. We can only control ours. So if you step in as an invitation to partner and you're the only one standing in the circle for years, you keep being an invitation to partner. But what I discovered once I stopped emasculating men is how much men are already an invitation to partner. And it had me inquire. Yes, there are men who are not. They are self-sufficient as a principle. Even Greg, who had that as part of his identity, there were ways that we could partner magnificently, like as parents. But there's this other thing I want to offer, Will, and it happened between Dan and I just a short while ago at the beginning of my 5-week kind of vacation, where something happened in checking into a hotel room in Nashville, where he went completely independent to solve the problem. And he didn't know that I was standing by to help solve it. I mean, this enormous rift. I didn't just have my feelings hurt. I was completely disconnected. And the way I described it to him the next day was that I couldn't feel love. I felt no love for him. And I realized that I couldn't feel love, period, even for myself. A really clear sign that I was deep in a human instinctive reaction. And when I told him I couldn't feel love for you, he said, yes, I could tell. And I became an island. And so here were these two human beings in this situation together, completely isolated. I actually piled up pillows on the edge of my bed between us. Like wanted a wall. I was so disconnected from my own spirit. And a funny thing had happened the day before when we were driving to the airport. We passed a lake, and this lake normally has an island in the center of it. And I noticed that the water had fallen so low that there was now a land bridge between this island and the surrounding environment. And my remark was, wow, I hope there aren't birds nesting on that island because now the predators can get to them through the land bridge. And it was just an offhand comment. Well, we didn't speak for a lot of hours, like 16 hours or something. We didn't speak to each other, sharing a hotel room, about to attend a retreat. I'm being guided by higher consciousness. The absolute opposite of it. And I came out of the bathroom and he was standing there and he said, can we hug? And I did not want to hug. But we hugged. And it was like two boxes hugging. There was no warmth no softness, no comfort, no connection, no nothing. But I acknowledged him later for offering the land bridge, that he had become an island, and that in that moment, asking for a hug, he had offered a land bridge. And even though I didn't want it, I accepted it. And that was the beginning of us being able to talk about what had happened and to sort it out and to reconcile it. And we now have evolved it because, we play. So land bridge became hand bridge. When there's a breakdown, he'll hold out his hand bridge, and I'll take his hand even when I don't want to. And we had a breakdown. We got back from my birthday trip to Hawaii. So I came out with something that we normally don't eat, a scone for the non-gluten eaters. Food bridge. And it's something that I said years and years ago about in a partnership, he or she who can does. So if you can say, I'm sorry, if you can say, let's talk, if you can say, if you can reach out your hand, you do reach out your hand.
Yeah.
And until we do that, we won't know if the other person will step into the circle. Until we step into the circle, we won't know who is going to show up. And that's what stunned me. When I stopped emasculating men, I thought I'd have to learn how to bring out the prince instead of the frog. I'd have to learn how to bring out the best in men. When I just stopped taking men's power, I was stunned and continue to be amazed by who men are before you're kind. Just stop being unkind and find out who men are. And so many of you are already in the circle, bewildered why women treat you like enemies when all you want is good for us. And you don't know that how we're judging you and perceiving you, we can't see your goodness because you don't express it like a woman, which goes back to our previous conversation. So many men are trying to express it like a woman in order to be seen, but it's a betrayal of yourself and cause you to be even less seen.
Yes. Yes.
This is why from the female side of the reconciliation, what I've said for years is that it's up to us. Men are not the source of the Cold War. Men are not on the attack. Men are on the defense. When women stop attacking, men disarm naturally. They don't have a need for it. And it's a different word that I use than powerful. In partnership, power disappears. Another way of saying it, there's power enough between us that we don't even talk about it. We don't even think about it. There's no power struggle because there's power enough between us. Yeah. There's no powerful, powerless, power zero. There's just us and ability, right? Power is the ability to do or generate or cause, right? There's just ability. In partnership, there's just ability. And that's what happens when we stop being afraid of each other and stop taking each other down. Or when we're afraid of each other, we say so. I'm scared. And last year when I produced Own Your Ultimatums, and Dan realized what I was talking about, and he's like, okay, what else on your list will we break up over? I said, every single thing.
Yes. All of them.
And each and every one of them, including the ones you already are, if you stop being that way. And 42 altogether. And at one point I said, I want to run. And he said, and he reached out and he said, okay, take my hand then. And then we're talking some more. And a little while later he goes, Now I want to run. Let's hold both hands.
That's great. What a man.
Yeah. I fall in love with the movement.
Yeah.
He's so big, you know? And he generates being that way when I'm at my worst, which is what I realized I needed in a partner, was not just someone I inspire to be great or can be great when I'm safe, but generates being great on their own when I'm my scariest and my scared, which obviously they go together. I'm my scariest when I'm the most scared. And when he reaches out to help me.
He's got that strength within him to be able to contain that and to be able to respond to that and to disarm it, let's say.
Yeah, he owns it.
Yeah.
So I think we should dedicate its own session to the great reconciliation.
Okay.
And I'll have some homework for you before, and I look forward to the conversation.
Me too. And thank you for pointing something out to me, by the way, because I know a lot of men who have dealt with being castrated for a long time, right? And whether they've allowed themselves to be or not, they've been the recipients of it, and they have a lot of distrust of women, and it's earned. And not only that, do they have the distrust of women, they're shamed, persecuted for even mentioning it, for even suggesting that women are anything less than perfect angels, that women have a shadow, that women have a dark side, that women are unkind or unfair to men. They get in trouble for even saying that. And so they have a lot of earned, we'll call it resentment, anger towards women and towards the entire cultural moment that doesn't allow them to even say, this is wrong and bad. And so when I say step into this, and women, of course, have their own culturally cultivated resentments towards men, as we've been discussing. So when I talk about having to step in at the same time, I'm speaking to those men that no, you have to let go of this as well. But you help, and this is the world that I come from, right? That not where I was born, but the world of the men's movement that I've come through with men who have recognized a lot of things that you're describing, haven't been able to put as clear language to them, and are yeah, I don't even know if I naturally, my body want to do this, but if I make myself vulnerable or available to a woman, is she going to bring her daggers into the circle? What's her disincentive from doing that? Because men can look around and we can see everywhere in movies and stuff like that, where it's all women got their daggers out. Hold on, while I just castrate all these men in this new Lord of the Rings series. I'm just going to 6 episodes of castrating men, right? And so men look at that and they're like, why should I trust women? But you remind me that the men who think about those sort of things is not all men. That there are a lot of men who are like, look, I'm just looking for partnership. I'm just here trying to do my thing. I want to be a husband. I want to be a provider. And there are a lot of men that are already standing in the circle. And you remind me of that. So thank you for that, because I think that there are some men that I'm trying to encourage to step into the circle, because I know many women who are like, I'm so ready to step into the circle. But then there's a ton of other people out there, men in particular, that are like, yeah, I'm all right. I've been here. Yeah, I've been holding it down. So thank you for reminding me of that.
You're welcome. I would also say, Will, that part of my intent of the Queen's Code, specifically the audiobook, is that one way that men can read it is once, hi, honey, we're on my last sentence, I think. You want to say hi to Will?
Oh, cool.
He's got to take his cold clothes off.
Okay.
Take them off. Oh, you have Snoopy on the Zamboni. Come on, honey. Yeah. Look at this face.
What a blessing.
Hey, Will.
Hey, what's up, Dan? Good to see you.
Good to see you. I'm out of the picture.
Not in the picture, and be red, because that pillow is not actual. You can fall in. Yeah. Yeah.
I'll let you guys get back to it. Good seeing you, Will.
Good to see you, Dan.
We're done just a minute.
Okay.
I believe, and I would love for you to check this out for me. I believe in listening to the Queen's Code and men recognizing the resonance of who you are. That you can also read it or listen to it from the intent to understand the source of emasculation.
Yes.
And by doing so, and I've witnessed this, you literally can become impervious to emasculation. You can just see it for what it is. Yeah, you can just see, she's scared out of her wits. I can handle this.
Yeah.
And that thought, I can handle this. I can be with this. I don't have to mess with this. I don't have to cave to this. All of those thoughts literally create themselves. You think you can handle it? You can. Period. And that's what I wish for men from the Queen's Code. Not only to see the goodness, the honor of your own motivations, and no longer let them be attacked when women are accusing you of baloney, right? Stuff that just isn't true. Not allow it.
Yes.
And that's the strength that we as women need. We know when we're full shit. And and we respect the man who doesn't fall for it. I know who you are. I know who I am. I'm not falling for that. Oh, really? Oh, thank goodness. Because we know we're our own worst enemies. So I'm working both sides of it. For women to give up justifying emasculating men, which is the beginning of curing ourselves of the habit and the reaction of it, and for men to stop falling for it. You don't have to agree to be emasculated. You can decline. Please decline. When it stops working, women will stop doing it.
Some will. Yeah. I gave a talk. I know that you have to go, but I gave a talk at a conference in 2021 that I'm going to turn into a YouTube video about this very subject, about how men can stop allowing themselves to be emasculated and where it comes from in women. So I'll send that to you when that's done.
Yeah.
Thank you.
We can link to it on our website. We can have people watch it.
I would love that. Awesome. Thank you so much, Alice.
To be continued. We'll communicate about that other stuff.
Okay. And then where would you like to send people? Any links to visit or social media profiles that you'd like?
AlisonArmstrong.com is the easiest place. It's the only place you can get the audiobook.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Perfect. We'll do that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Alison.
I love you.
I love you too.
Bye.